Good, I must say.
Thank you, Harold. That's
Yeah.
because I'm glad to be here.
I know. I'm always glad to see you. Eric Kruger. It's so good to see you
Thank you for
again.
inviting me.
And bear with me, Eric. I'm going to be learning about this coaching business, which I find it very interesting, but I'll be learning, so bear with me. And welcome very much to Conversations. Pleasure to welcome to the program a friend of myself and of Conversations in the World, and that being Eric Kruger. He's down now as he's a coach, an executive coach for business leaders or world leaders. And it's a very interesting concept other than consulting. And he's got a company, and it's called Compass Development Strategies, if I understand. And he's a very interesting fellow we've known for a long time. And I'm really looking forward to learning from you. And Eric, welcome once again to Manhattan Network.
Thank you, Harold. And I'm sure I will learn from your questions.
Well, I don't know. We'll try. If I
it's
do
going to be a mutual building.
This will be a coaching session, right? But like
yes,
I mentioned to you before we started, Eric, the way I start this is, once again, we've talked before about your sea change when you wrote your book and so forth. We've known each other quite a long time. But would you share a little bit, in a thumbnail way, your background, a little bit of your birth, where you were born, education, that sort of thing. And then we're going to get into this coaching, executive coaching role that you have for yourself now. But share your background, if you would, please, in a brief way.
I'll aim to be brief.
All right, try to be brief.
As you can see, I have an accent.
Yes, yes.
So I was born in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
of a British father and a French mother.
Okay.
And I grew up in 4 countries.
Mm-hmm. What were the 4?
Britain,
Right.
France, Switzerland, and Belgium.
They're all pretty close together.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also went to school in Spain and Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And I also lived and worked there. Well, you're getting the pattern. I specialized in international economics and business at the London School of Economics.
Okay, good school.
So
yeah.
my first profession is as an international economist.
Okay.
And then I kind of layer. The second is as an international management consultant.
Right.
And then as a cross-cultural management consultant.
You've always been interested in the cross-cultural.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a different discipline and involves a great deal of work with different values, beliefs, and customs in different countries.
Very important question now as we globalize and the world becomes a village, as Mr. McLuhan said, and so forth. Yeah.
Very much so. And believe me, one is learning all the time.
Right.
And then recently, I realized that I had been involved in coaching without knowing it.
Okay.
And people pointed this out to me. So, and that coaching was a new profession. So I
Okay.
took exams, and I'm now qualified to be a professional executive coach.
Wonderful.
And I specialize in executive coaching for global leaders.
Okay, and I'm going to want to talk about the distinction between coaching and consulting, and these kind of things are important, and there are many important differences, and I'm here to learn about that and so forth. And congratulations on your newfound role as
Thank
a
you.
coach. Newt Rockney, coach of of a football team or something, but
Yeah.
along individual lines. Could we go back to economics? Did you form a very philosophical basis for your economic philosophy, or the economic philosophy that appeals to you in terms of what informs the economics profession and the theoretical basis for informing the political and business class? So Keynesian, Marxian, or do you have an economic theory that you took from the London School of Economics, or in general, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. For me, it's always a blend of theory and applied, theory
Okay.
and practice. And I guess it's a blend, but essentially I'm trying to ask the question, what is the good society?
Okay.
What is the blend between freedom and regulation?
Right.
What is the blend between liberty and some kind of restraint that leads to a society that is both just and creative? We haven't found this yet.
We have not. We're looking for that over all of human history, in a sense. And that's really important. That would help to inform, I would think, in terms of a lot of the things you'd be thinking about. I would think, or maybe we needn't dwell on that. But
Well, the U.S. has enormous dynamism. It's an incredibly creative society.
Yeah.
But it can be very hard on those who are less successful. France, Germany, and China are also successful in their own right, but they are extremely hard on anyone who is creative, entrepreneurial, and so forth. And I guess my philosophy is to find a way that permits both things to happen.
that would seem to be the mark of the really effective executive in any sense. That would be the the dynamic that he would be trying to find, it seems to me, in terms of a socially responsible attitude towards society.
Something that works, and
Yeah.
something that appeals to people, and something that's fair.
So you're pragmatic in a sense, right?
Very much, yes.
Very much pragmatic, and
Yeah.
I understand you like Mr. Emerson, Ralph Waldo.
Well, this I love very much, yes. As a
I hear
philosopher,
you're going to go visit his place tomorrow.
I'm going to visit his home tomorrow,
Flash.
yes.
Yes, okay, very good. Yeah,
But I guess this
good
brings us
company,
to
yeah.
coaching,
Okay.
and to your question.
Okay.
First of all, what is coaching? What is
Yeah.
a coach? And essentially,
An executive coach.
An executive coach. There are lots of kinds of coaching. It's a new profession, relatively speaking.
How new? How new do we have it in terms of particularly the business
At
community?
most 10 years,
Only?
and
Okay.
an executive coaching maybe 5.
Coming out of the consulting world?
Coming out of its own world, I think.
Okay.
And having a lot to do with turning consulting upside down, if you will, because
Really?
a
Okay.
key distinction between coaching and consulting is that in consulting, and I've had to learn this because I've been a consultant
Yeah.
to international executives.
Yes, I know you were for a long time, and very good consultant.
Well,
You were way out in terms of understanding the implications of the Internet before Internet was just a gleam in the eyes of a lot of people. With that book, Sea Change?
that was another book.
Yeah.
It was the politics and the economics of the Internet.
Not a small matter, and that was
That
early
a-
as it was
a-
emerging.
A second book, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Its impact, the impact of the Internet and cyberspace
Kind
on,
of a big issue, don't you
on
think?
society and
Kind of a
economics.
big issue.
issue.
That's a big systems
One that I
issue.
was not at all equipped to handle. Believe me, I was just
You
groping.
co-wrote it with someone.
That's right,
A
yes.
woman, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, indeed.
Good
So-
book, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for remembering. So in consulting, the consultant is supposed to have the answers. That's what you would pay a consultant for.
Yeah, you don't want to hire somebody who doesn't know,
That's right.
I guess, yeah.
In coaching, I would have no answers for you. I would have questions. I might have insights, but I would always ask your permission first. So that it proceeds through very, very powerful questions and from what I call the 6 A's of coaching.
Okay,
Inner coaching, awareness,
yeah.
attitude shift, and a vision of new alternatives. Very important. The imagination is much more powerful than anything else in this world. And then outer coaching, an agreement to a certain action, the action itself, and then accountability.
Okay.
So to give you an example,
Yeah,
you
okay.
might say, well, I want to grow this operation, but nobody gives me any money when I ask for them, and there are so many regulatory obstacles and so forth.
Yeah.
So we would work on this, and I would say, well, what are some other ways of getting the money? What if you didn't need money and you needed maybe exchange of services? What's another way of doing this? And then we might agree upon some kind of action that you would agree to go to the Federal Regulatory Commission and propose an innovative strategy. You might be a little nervous at this, so I would be your coach in encouraging you. We would actually rehearse.
Yeah, okay. I see, okay.
And
Now,
then I would make sure that you'd done it.
Share with me the difference between that and, it seems to me that would be much of what might happen by an effective consultant. And it seems to me it bespeaks a great deal of empathy.
It certainly requires a lot of empathy,
Yeah.
but notice in this instance, I was giving the answers, but the answers were supposedly coming from you.
I see. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah,
Okay.
I see. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the key. And it's also, coaching has also been likened to psychotherapy.
Yeah,
but
it sounds a little bit
in
like
order
it,
to
yeah.
pass our exams, we had to write a long essay on how it's different.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy is very profound and can be extremely helpful.
Right on to psychoanalysis. It can take Woody Allen did it for 16
For
years.
16 years, and look where he is now.
Well, it didn't seem to serve him
So in
bad.
contrast,
Yeah.
where psychoanalysis and psychotherapy deal with things that are going wrong, coaching assumes that nothing is wrong.
It does.
Where psychotherapy deals with the past, coaching only deals with the past where you have been successful. It draws on a past success.
Well, is that like Norman Vincent Peale, positive thinking, or is it you know, along those lines, or some of our motivational speakers that are, you know, drier and...
That's a good question, but really the motivation is coming from within and not from a Norman Vincent Peale or an Anthony Robbins. It is finding in you the energy, the idea that works for you.
Okay.
I have no idea what it is. My skill is not in the idea, but in bringing it to the forward.
So you assume no mistakes.
No.
God makes no mistakes.
There are no mistakes.
There are no mistakes in the universe. So it's part of an ontology or a view of the universe,
it's
right?
a value judgment.
A value judgment
Yes.
in the way,
So if I am given an executive, quote unquote, for remedial coaching, the first thing we do in the session, the first session, say, this is not remedial.
Yeah, right, okay.
Okay, that you are already fine. We're going to, it may appear this way to the outside world. We will deal with challenges. We're not going to gloss over them. But essentially, there is a way to addressing these. Not all of these challenges are resolvable. That would be, you know, a kind of Pollyanna kind of world.
That's why you want to avoid that,
But to come back to Emerson, since you brought him up.
Well, he's a good guy to come back to,
Emerson was understood the essence of coaching very well when he wrote, we all need someone to tell us to do what we need and want to do.
Interesting conversation.
So it's like, but notice that the key word in there is what we need. In other words, what you, Harold Channer, need.
And I need, and my dog needs, and
whatever.
everybody needs.
Yes. It's coming from inside you. So the coaching relationship is very client-focused.
Self-reliance, he wrote about?
Yes, indeed. But sometimes, you know...
It's very American,
it's very American. You can be so self-reliant that... but it still doesn't give you the answer. And it's good to have somebody who is totally... I guess in a coaching relationship, you will never have been with someone who is so much on your side. Who is your champion through thick and thin. And there will be times when things are, you know, you might get even laid off or fired in the process, but I'll still be your champion. That doesn't normally happen. On the contrary, an executive for whom, who was brought to me as a client, quote unquote, for remedial coaching, ended up winning the Outstanding Achievement Award. And only one person...
Within his corporation?
Within the corporation, and only one person knew that this person was in coaching. So there was a complete behavioral and attitudinal shift.
And he had been brought to you because they were thinking of letting him go or something?
No, it was a lady. Okay.
Or a lady, okay.
Yes, very high up, very, very clever. They felt that she could not communicate, and she'd antagonize people. And so we took it from there. And so she would actually start out by saying, I may have antagonized you in the past. I want now to work with you. So you actually take the issue, bring it out into the open. And that brings us to the global leaders part of it, if you will. Now, by leader, it can be, as you pointed out before, or asked me about before, it can be all the way from a CEO to an administrative assistant or an executive assistant, a research scientist, a manager.
To get down to the really important people.
Absolutely. You know, executive assistants are the gatekeepers. They come into contact with, and a lot can go wrong in a different culture. So when I say global leaders, I mean anyone who is in a position of initiating an action in the global economy.
In the global economy, and again, it's a global economy business.
Usually in business, yes.
It could apply to a college president, or
certainly,
any kind
or
of
health administrators,
or
the world of work, the world of work in general.
Okay.
But let me...
Would it appear in the world of creative endeavor? Dancers, singers, entertainers, composers?
Absolutely.
Musicians,
the
it
approach
seems to
is
have a
inherent.
universal quality beyond just executives, although you deal with them, right?
The word executive is that somebody is involved in creating, in doing.
You're talking in a certain sense, they use the term excellence, but you're also talking about somebody realizing their full potential in their given area of concern.
Very much.
All right.
Very
that
much.
could apply to people other than those in business.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yes. to give you an idea, I also deal with executives towards the end of their careers who are about to retire. And I had a very high-powered international lawyer who all their lives had been involved in what I would call the very tough issues of life. Murders, rapes, massacres, and so forth.
Yeah, that could apply to a police commissioner, too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we realized that this person was very much invested in this kind of work because of a kind of guilty approach to a life of privilege. And so we said, well, what would it be if for the next part of your life you gave yourself the right to deal with something you really love and that is pleasurable?
How many people do you think in their life's unfolding are doing or leading a life which gives them great personal fulfillment and pleasure, as opposed to those who are going like Corey slaves to do what they're told by people who order them to do it, like they used to do in the United States Army when I was an enlisted man? I used to try and reason with the sergeant. Let's do this thing democratically, and they didn't want to hear it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, the Army is perhaps not very democratic.
Well, most institutions are not, I think.
Most institutions, hierarchy is not very democratic.
It isn't, no.
It can be made to be.
Most of our institutions are formulated that way, it seems to me. So Erich Fromm would have been a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a person, a philosopher, and he said the sane society, you don't want to assume that the society, the way it's organized or what you're being asked to adjust to, is a sane thing, because it's a lot of people. You don't understand what I'm saying?
Very much,
that
yes.
That the template, you say everything is okay, isn't necessarily the case, particularly if you're a political radical who sees the need for change.
It's very, very rough sailing out there. But let me just come back to this person who was an international lawyer. This person is now using their legal skills in representing artists from Africa in the galleries and museums of New York.
Okay,
that's a fundamental shift, and it gave me great pleasure to see the amount of pleasure that this person is
in retirement from the
Yes,
profession?
no, it's a little bit different. I do what I call creative de-retirement strategy.
Creative de-retirement. De-retirement.
De-retirement.
Why de-retirement?
It's coming out of retirement.
Coming out. Oh, you're in retirement and you come out of retirement into another realm of your life's
That's
phase.
right.
Yeah.
It's also because my company...
I think that's a huge growth area in terms of understanding the human condition.
Yes.
I don't think most people do, because we're so wrapped up in the work ethic that informs the business ethic. But for reasons I mentioned to you on the telephone, Lord Keynes is saying, I think we've got a different kind of world coming, and the realm of the self-actualizing person working within a non-authoritarian context, within a cooperative context, is going to become very, very large in terms of people getting a sense of reasonable identity, doing things that don't fit into the historical pattern we may be subsuming and transcending. That's my own personal sense.
Very much
I think
so.
you've got yourself
We're
a real
living
goodie
longer.
there.
We're living longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also not everybody can afford to retire, even who they might have been earning six figures. Pensions are not what they were. And so in contrast with Lord Keynes, who said there might be technological unemployment, we might have a lot of people who are what I call generationally unemployed. That is to say, they reach a biological or legal age of 65 or whatever the retirement age is.
Full of vim and
full of energy with another 30, 40 years to live. And they find that, going around the golf course, which is fine for some people, is really good, or going around the world is not enough. And so I work with them. They come to me. This is a new niche, by the way. It's more recent than the others. And this is a very exciting area because we are really uncovering buried treasure, deeply buried treasure.
Yeah, I think some of the best people you can deal with are the, what do you call it when a professor, emeritus people that are retired. I think because you're out of the context of where you have to be concerned with these very all-consuming issues in terms of a corporation, and you've got a freedom of thinking about things in another context, cross-culturally perhaps, in a large sense of the word cross-culture. You're as interested in things other than the tunnel vision that a lot of the institutions encourage people to assume.
Yes, indeed. Can I give you another example?
By all means.
Because it's such a rich area. A guy had been an executive of a big multinational corporation that dealt with manufactured metals. He understood metals very well.
Right.
And he retired and was at a loose end.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
30 years of your life to
I mean,
something. And then
the golf and so forth. But one of the things he loved to do was to row in a scull, one of these.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so he seemed really passionate about this. And what I enjoyed was the way he talked about the skull itself, the metal of it. And I said, well, what's the metal? And it was apparently titanium.
Yeah, right, okay.
Which is very strong, very light, and has just the right torque between flexibility and rigidity. Well, the long and the short of it is that he is now not making these, but distributing these globally from a manufacturer in New Zealand and having the time of his life.
Why? Well, okay.
He is distributing skulls made out of titanium to markets, people all over the world.
And he's retired from his traditional
Yes,
thing.
he does this out of his garage.
Is he, okay, that's interesting, yeah, that's
and
right.
he's 75.
Right. Just in the prime of life.
In the prime of life.
Yeah, right, that kind of thing, and doing that's interesting. Or things, yeah, because there are lots of things that are not, like for instance, if I may just bring up something, in the realm of communication, let's say in terms of multimedia or electronic communication, we have a whole industry. We have the NBC and CBS and BBC and all kinds of pros and so forth. And we got a lot of capacity for having communication developing, being able to do artful editing and all that sort of thing and everything. You got that. And then you have it to where it's coming down on the desktop of the individual and so forth. It's coming down to where if you're in the business, then you've got, if you're at NBC or something, they've got ad responsibilities for interrupting, and they've got a market thing they have to do. They got the business side of the business, all of that. But if you're, like, we're in public access here, and they open up the means by which you can produce and distribute programming for just the fun of it. It's like thought of as amateur. You're not here to make money. A lot of executives have to have their eye on that bottom line thing in order to give them the discipline Mr. Emerson was talking about, maybe, that kind of thing. But you're here, and you're going to have a lot of people who are doing it because, and then people tend to think, if you're not making money at it, it's not serious. Because so much of our attention has been put upon the necessities of being in that make money practical reality, rather than in the realm of perhaps creativity and a kind of loosening and liberation from the constrictions of an all-consuming practical concern with the bottom line that historically has been the necessity of most people to take into account first if they want to call themselves responsible to themselves, their children, and the nation. You understand?
Absolutely.
Creativity very often is not of that nature.
Well, you have to pay your bills. But the question is...
But what happens if your bills are paid, and then you're free to do what you want?
Then you're free. Well, even if they're not...
What if we get to a world where it is of that nature?
Well, we're approaching that in many areas.
I think we are. I think we're transcending
scarcity. What I'd like to do with that situation is redefine bottom line. Redefine net income. In economics, we have a concept, psychological income.
Okay.
So, for example, you could be making millions on Wall Street or in major television.
Yeah, say, you know, on...
But the difference between that income and what you're doing now is the psychological income, the benefit, the pleasure that you receive from doing this kind of work.
I used to have a friend, if I may.
Please.
I used to have a friend of mine, really good guy. He happened to be a musician, right? And he had a loft, and it was over here right in New York City. He had a little loft. It was a little... And it was on 26th and 7th, right down here. And it was set apart from all the other buildings in a business section. And he had all the musical instruments in his loft, okay? He had all these musical instruments because he was a musician. And he had it set up. And the fellas that are jazz musicians, Artie Shepp, a lot of the leading musicians, jazz musicians, really creative, would go to Sweet Basil's or someplace. And the tourists are in from Scarsdale paying their money. And they're getting money for the gig. And if they're getting, and then after the gig is over, the paying gig, they got to pay the rent or something, then they would fall by his place. They'd pick up a horn and start wailing, And that's when they made real music, because it wasn't tied into, now that may be a romanticized view of the human condition, but the idea that whatever is worth being done is worth getting money for, I think is something, and if people are at leisure, they're doing it for just the pure pleasure of it. And if that's an art for art's sake, or creative for creative sake, except in these days now, you could be doing that thing in the loft and then it could be picked up on YouTube and put all over the world in a way that could be done without that business model interfering, the practicality thing of the business model interfering. That's a creative thing. Do you understand what I'm saying? You
Very
could be
much.
freed from the institutional constrictures of our institutional structures that are inherited out of history to be leisure-oriented and creative on your own terms, what you want to do, because you're in a position of, let's say, having what you need in a practical sense in a reasonable context for everybody. That would be a different kind of world than the one we have now, don't you think?
Very much so. But what
And is that dreaming for something that
not
can
at
never
all.
be?
To bring it a little closer to reality, I would say working within the institution and making creativity valued in a new way, loosening up some of the constraints. And that is a trend I see in the modern corporation. Enormous
You do
creativity.
see that.
Oh, yes.
You do see that.
Enormous,
There's
yes.
hope for the corporate man. The gray flannel suit.
he or she is no longer wearing a gray flannel suit.
No, but you understand what I'm saying.
Very much.
Most people I know, or a lot of people I know, they just see the corporations as essentially fascistic. It's the executive vice president, and everybody has to do what they're in cubicles, and they're doing what they're told, and there are marching orders and that kind of thing. It's not creative. It's just a practical thing, and they're just doing it to fill in time and so forth, except for the few people at the top who give the orders. Well, that's a wrong impression of the corporate structure?
No, I think it's accurate, but I think that there's a quiet revolution with the new concept of the manager or the executive inside the corporation as creative coach, creativity-oriented coach.
Okay, so the managers that you coach could become coaches to the people
that
they
is
work
part
with.
of my purpose.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, a lot of my executive coaching is to get to coach the manager or executive into becoming the coach they already are, and just loosening up the reins a little bit. May I give you some examples?
Loosening up the reins a little bit, not anarchy, not herding cats.
Anarchy doesn't
Anarchy
always
does
work.
Not always, hardly ever do, I think. Yeah.
But let me first answer a question. How many people on this planet are really doing what they wish? I think very few. I would not wish to put a percentage on it.
You want to take a guess? I would say it would be just 1/10 of 1% or something.
Something like that.
Very few people.
But
unfortunately.
But I think we're in an era where even in quite poor countries, we are looking at new ways of thinking, new ways of being, new approaches to work, coaching is one of those ways, but there are plenty of others. There are a lot of creativity consulting.
New ideas of human nature.
Very much so.
New ideas of psychological states of liberation and fulfillment.
And a certain level of affluence does make that possible.
I think it really is. I think without that, I think with affluence, or at least comfortableness with the material needs.
And very good access to all kinds of information and inspiration.
That's coming almost willy-nilly, it
and
seems
also
to me.
the breakdown of the old paradigms.
Well, the breakdown of the old paradigms includes a lot of fascistic corporations.
Absolutely, because it doesn't work. The most successful corporations
well, they still do work.
Are the most creative. They're still corporations. They have a semblance. They have some hierarchy.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yes. But it's interesting when you actually draw them, instead of being a very pyramidal corporation like this, they're like this, and some corporations are even upside down.
They really
where the manager is facilitating, she or he is coaching from beneath. What do you need? What resources do you need? Why isn't that working? How can this be? Do you see what I mean? This is the coach as manager. This is the ideal.
Okay, so that's an idealized state in a way, and that could apply to any institution,
hospitals,
Philharmonic Orchestra,
universities, orchestras,
or cultural institutions,
museums, and the whole bit. Yes,
okay.
Even television stations.
Even television stations, yeah.
But let me tell you a little bit more about the cross-cultural aspect.
Yeah, because you've always been involved in the cross-cultural thing. You've always had your ear out for that in a very eclectic kind of understanding of the importance of appreciation of the other.
You see, people say, well, aren't we moving towards a single world of business? We're all speaking English. We're using one software, more or less, or just several. I won't name them. We're using the Western calendar. We're using concepts that work all over the world, et cetera, et cetera. And I would agree with you. But that's only on the surface.
Okay.
So, for example, Americans are learning to have 3-hour lunches with Mexican counterparts.
3 hours?
Yeah, and to put their watches in their pockets because the emphasis in Mexico is on relationship. The French are learning to have 1-hour lunches with Americans because the American emphasis is on task and getting it done.
The French are learning that?
And the French are learning
I thought the French used to have 4-hour lunches.
No, it's the Mexicans.
Oh, the Mexicans.
Yes.
The what kind of lunch hours do they, with all that good sauces and everything?
Well, normally
it's worth
a good French
meal.
lunch is normally at least 2.5 hours.
Thank you. That's what I had the idea of.
But some French are learning with Americans to have a 1-hour lunch and to talk about business.
Just grab a quick hot dog.
Whatever it takes.
Be American.
And talk about business. They don't necessarily like doing it, but they're learning it. And, you know, Americans are learning Chinese and all sorts of things. At the same time, deep down, the values are not changing. And so what cross-cultural coaching is involved in is, for example, taking the concept of leadership. In the U.S., the leadership ideal is very much a coaching ideal. It's the leader as an encourager, as somebody who empowers you. I like to think of Eisenhower as that model. Whereas in other countries, say France, and China, it's a very different. The leader is de Gaulle. The authority has to come from the top down, and the coach who says you might wish to, or what's another way of doing that, is derided as being weak. So we have to learn how to translate.
Things change. Genghis Khan was pretty authoritative, you know. And
I guess he was. He's the model at one end of the scale.
Churchill, or Adolf Hitler, right, or something. That kind of thing. Yeah, it's very.
They were not the antithesis. They were the antithesis of coaching.
But the institutional structure itself.
But it's also the values. Okay. So, for example, trust in most Anglo-Saxon cultures is fairly quick to build in business. In other cultures, say on the continent or in East Asia, it takes a lot longer.
And face is important.
Face is very important. The way you, how do you bring somebody into accountability with something that they've done wrong? In East Asia, you have to be extremely careful so that we have a whole coaching on how to give feedback that's constructive, that draws attention to the mistake, but also is empowering and does not lose face. In fact, we don't see it as a mistake.
And I don't think we've developed that well enough to understand the other culture or recognize the importance of the other culture in a world where empires have gone and run roughshod over other cultures and so forth.
But the most successful companies, or rather executives, are those who first come to awareness that they need to learn something. And believe me, I am still in that process.
I do not know it all. Let's
stop
the cameras. He does not know it all. Everybody.
I consider myself.
I mean, I thought we had
a laborer in the vineyards, but I don't know it all.
Shocked. You don't know it all.
One is learning all the time. I can assure you. Take the whole question of time. The amount of time that an individual in say a company feels that she or he has in one culture is very different from another.
Yeah, right.
All right. In this culture, we have the shortest sense or the smallest amount of time available.
Are you talking about American or New York City?
Well, New York
City is
New York is way at the top. Yes,
right.
Of course, we only have 24 hours, but we pack it in. We pack it in. Whereas in other cultures, what matters is not packing it in, but quality, relationship, thoroughness, and something that is a little new to American business life, the balanced life.
Balance with family and so forth, and other issues, culture. Yeah.
Yes, time to reflect, time to create.
We're pretty workaholic, don't you think? Or are we? Or is that Babbitt? You know, I'm just drawing upon certain things and everything like that.
Well, many people...
I probably have a more jaundiced view of the business world than you do. You deal with it.
Well,
and you probably have a better,
no,
more realistic
I would
one.
first agree with you that many people are workaholics.
Yeah.
But there's another way of looking at how, say, your average American driven, successful executive looks at work.
Yeah.
She or he is looking at it as a form of self-expression.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if they only 35% of people in the workforce take their full vacation. I heard this recently.
Is that right? Here in America?
In the United States. So what is going on?
Or retirement is seen as something awfully dreadful to think about. What am I going to do?
What am I going to do?
Because people get their sense of identity from that, and that's really important psychological stuff.
Well, there is, as I say, there's American business is, at its best, is very creative and very empowering. And so the person who does not take the vacation is staying in the office for one or two reasons. They're either scared that they might lose their job.
Right.
I really want to pay attention to that, because that is also the case.
A lot of it is based upon fear.
A lot of that is that.
The whole system by which the world is held together, whether it's school or whatever. At least it used to be in Dickensian day with those sticks. They used to cane. Were you in England where they used to cane people?
Yes.
They used to hit the hand. Why don't you know that irregular verb? You know, and get
that's a sort of top-down thing.
That kind of authoritarian attitude is still pretty strong.
Well, it's also
am I wrong?
The security of work
Yeah.
is over in the United States.
The
Okay?
security of work is over now. It's
But
only 8%
what I try to point out
Yeah.
to people who are concerned with this is, it's easier to lose a job than it's ever been, but it's also easier to create a new one or to find a new one than it's ever been.
It is?
I'm very much involved in that.
Okay.
Oh, yes. And the communication that we have...
That's apart from your said before, if I may, that's the thing where you said before, what was it?
De-retirement.
De-retiring is different. That's learning to live without those motivations. Or is that finding a new job?
Is that just finding a new job or a new business or a new activity?
But it's back in the thing about the money. Everything's in there's no point in doing anything unless it's going to bring you money and security and bread to eat and some cake on Saturday.
Well, you have to eat.
I mean,
but
yeah, you have to eat.
Remember, for the retiring person, sometimes in most cases, there's some kind of a pension.
Right.
So they're off the hook from
Suppose we had it to where everything is, you got a big black box.
Yes.
Okay, you get a big black box, and the big black box can turn out everything material that human beings could possibly want, from food to health to everything, and it's there. And all of the things that are involved in terms of making these businesses go to turn out stuff, goods and services and all the rest of it, is provided as a given to, let's say, a generation. And then people are just free. They don't have to think about, what am I going to do to make money so I have a house? What am I going to do to make money so I have health, so I have food, that kind of stuff. They're just free to do what it is that they want to do, with nobody telling them what it is that they have to do in order to eat or to have any of the material things. Would that be an absolutely horrible world where all human purpose would be taken away? Because that idea is the one that motivates most people and takes precedence over all other ideas in terms of what constitutes responsibility. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand
Identity.
very much.
Could we live in a world of affluent, that's too strong, comfortably leisured status for the population? And what would they then possibly do?
A growing number.
Do you understand?
Yes, indeed.
I think that's coming.
A growing number of people in this country and in others are experiencing that. But what I find
That's
inherent...
what Keynes said we're going to face, technological unemployment.
Yes.
Technological capability to produce overwhelming everything. So then what are people going to do when they're not busy making widgets?
Well, what I find inherent in every living organism, be it a plant...
Well, now we're getting down to physics and things,
be it a plant or a lizard or a fish or a bear or a bird or what have you,
even
is that some kind of striving against a challenge is necessary, and conducive to creativity and flourishing and
One
survival.
of the things that is really
and so we
important.
need that foil.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah, well, that people
very
are,
wealthy people.
Yeah, that's not only built into human nature; it's built like it's good to be able to survive, isn't it?
You
That seems to be a very important
you
thing.
have to survive. But what I'm trying to say is that, for example, a growing number of very wealthy people
Yeah.
are indeed in this quote-unquote predicament. Those are the people that sometimes come to see me.
They're in the predicament of what now?
Of having no limits.
Having no limits in
To their
terms of-
consumption.
To their consumption. There's a few. Yeah, right.
All
okay.
right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's something very significant lacking.
But they live in a world where there are women who are wondering which of the two babies they're going to let starve to death because there's not enough food in a world that can produce the food, and it does not have a system that gets to where everybody's involved. In an unjust world. I saw President
Yes.
Carter on the other day, and somebody asked him, do we live in an elementally just world, and the trends therein, are they of a just nature? And he said, of course not. Does it matter that we live in a world that's not just for the overwhelming majority of the world population and the trendings therein? And is there any reason to be concerned with the fact that the system that's in place is not legitimate in a historical sense, that has to be subsumed by some sort of an altered reading because of the evolution of events in the large context? Or
I think so, but in many ways, the economies of this world have solved the production problem.
that's what Mr. Keynes said.
It's the distribution problem.
Yeah, but isn't that part of an equation?
That's the key.
He was the big demand side
Yes.
guy, and deficit spending if necessary, or whatever, the demand side, wasn't he? He was an economist.
Very
right?
much so. Let me give you an example. An IBM executive was at the peak of his corporate career, and he was asked if he would pro bono manage some industrial parks in town in the South Bronx as a way, because he was very good at managing. And he got so interested in this. He was paid, I think, $1 for this.
For $1 what?
$1
A year?
Yes.
All that?
Yes.
What did he do with it all?
Well, the main thing is that
Yeah.
he did this as a sideline.
Why do you have to get paid anything?
Well, I think had to enter him on the computer or something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, the long and the short of it is he got so engrossed in this. He got so much psychological income that he accepted a position at about a fourth of his corporate salary in order to devote himself full time.
And he was doing the two at the same time?
No, eventually he resigned from IBM.
He was at IBM when he developed that sideline. Then.
Yes,
Okay.
he was asked to. He never thought that he would do this.
Now, what if he was doing that and it didn't bring him anything ever? Except the fact that there's all kinds of widgets getting to people who need it, and everybody's dancing, and the
Well,
kids are happy and everything, and you're not getting any return for
You
it.
have to get something.
You do think that?
Yes.
You do
And
have to
it
get some
doesn't have
return.
to necessarily be in the form of money. It can be in the form of exchange. There's an enormous amount of bartering going on.
Why do you have to get something? Why can't you
Well, in
just
order
do
to
it for...
survive.
No. If that black box is producing enough to where you have enough, and then you don't have to get, and then you do what you're doing, you don't have to get anything for it because you've got what you need or want.
If you've got...
If you had an ideal world, and that's
you,
the sort of thing Lord Keynes is saying we're coming upon, and we may be actually coming upon that, we're going to have to deal with that in a big sense, that you're not motivated by dealing. Or if I give you enough coconuts, will you do what I tell you? Or can I, that kind of thing, which seems to be foremost in the minds of most of our institutional structures, and even the idea of the work ethic and so forth. It may be outdated.
Very, very much.
Or you think,
well,
or not?
work for money or something, but there's an
But why
enormous amount of
something?
philanthropy going on.
Well,
okay, take
philanthropy-
the example of Brooke Astor. She's a very interesting
passed,
example.
yeah.
I mean, she had an enormous fortune.
Gave away $200 to New York, $200 million to New York City.
And yet very few people would deny that she worked extremely hard.
I wasn't familiar with her. Victoria Gregorian worked with her.
Yes.
She cleaned up our library in Bryant Park. Remember Bryant Park? They used to have rats running around there.
She
and
did
now
many,
it's
many
a
things.
beautiful thing.
I mean, for me, what matters most is that she found a school. She found out that the school in Brooklyn needed a boiler, and if it didn't have one, would be cold in the winter. She made sure that that boiler got replaced.
Okay.
It's the little things as much as anything. Anyway, people like her work extremely hard, and yet they if you wish, they're getting psychological income.
All right,
they don't need the money coming from the activity. So what's very interesting is to see the directions in which American philanthropy is going. I say American because it's much more developed here than in other countries. In France and Germany and so forth, it's the government who looks after
They're not doing well measuring up the UN Millennium Goals of 1/7 of 1% giving to development of the poverty. They're way at the bottom. The United States of America is at the bottom.
Oh, from that point of view, yes.
So they're very parsimonious as far as the poor and the least advantaged.
The government
They don't seem to care about the poor and the downtrodden. In the American model, they will let them, you know, that's what I'm saying.
Who's the they?
The established interests.
Yes. No,
the philanthropists who've made money. It's all for the opera or for the Lincoln Center or something that's going to serve the interests of the
well, if you take somebody like Ted Turner or Bill Gates, Bill and Melissa Gates, they are working well outside the establishment.
That's true.
And they're working on the poorest of the poor and the neediest of the neediest, both in the U.S. and internationally.
Okay.
And I guess that is another example of somebody who they've met their basic needs, and they're working very hard. They're working very hard. And so I guess, I believe, if you ask me about my philosophy,
yes, right.
not so much an economic philosophy, that each human being is the ideal for each human being is for her or him to find the fullest expression.
That's what we're looking for. But when
and so all it is a question of tapping it and taking the restraints out of the way, giving a little direction.
Do you think your coaching could help President Bush? Do you think you could get? I just watched him saying that the examples of Iraq and Vietnam are to be compared. The man seems to have a very different kind of idea than a lot of people do about what the world needs, and a lot of our leaders do. And our leaders do not have a vision that is relevant to what the future requires. Do you think we have a technological capability now on two vectors? We have a technological augmented capability to push a button that will destroy the whole species. Do you realize that seems to be, it's a modeling only, but we can destroy the whole species. Couldn't do that in the Second World War. That's an existential new reality. There would be something on the other side that would be comparable to that. And we live in a world where Mr. Carter and others will say, we do not live in an elementally just world. Paul Krugman said that the real growth in the American economy from 2003 to 2005 didn't even go to the upper 5%, even 1%, not even the 1/10 of 1%. There was a little bit of growth there, but the real growth went to the upper 100th of 1%. We're back to Gilded Age. We do not live in and most of the people are wage slaves. The reason they go to work is because they have to in order to have bread to eat. We do not live in a liberated context. We don't live in a liberated, but we have a capability that our institutions we've inherited will not allow us to realize in order to serve the whole of the human society in a liberated context of everybody, where everybody's able to realize not only their full biography, but their full potential. We don't have a system that lets us do what we're capable of doing on the living side. So you're asking people to adjust to a world that needs to be transformed fundamentally, and there's no leadership from our political or business leadership that's proposing that, much less even our intellectual leadership.
It's a systemic disorder.
Do you think we're going to blow it all up?
Well, we could.
No, but what is your thought?
First of all, I think that the U.S. is far from being the richest society. I think it's one of the poorer.
Well, I was thinking of the collective human society. I was thinking of the collective human society.
In terms of, do we think?
We don't have a vision that the future requires, and they're not providing one. The system that we've inherited out of history is not able to provide sustenance to the whole of the body politic and the trends therein. But you think the system is organized and trending well and so forth?
Very badly. But I also think it's a tail end of a generation. You asked me whether I could coach
Mr. Bush.
Mr. Bush.
Could you get, I mean, just
it's a little bit like the light bulb in California.
Yeah,
it depends if he wants to be coached. Certainly, I would welcome the opportunity to have a very a series of very penetrating
Soon as you
questions
finish
on
with
it.
him, you could deal with Mr. Cheney.
Possibly. But I would start by
but-
something. Do you think that Iraq exists?
Yeah.
Because I don't think Iraq exists.
I
It
don't
doesn't exist. There is no Iraq.
No, there's only Kurdistan and Sunnistan and Sunni.
And the three hate each
Sunnistan.
other, have never, you know, we're getting a little off subject here,
Yeah.
but until 1919, there was no such thing as Iraq. It was
peace
something cobbled together with an artificial name by the British.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there was a they had a very difficult war until 1927.
Sykes-Picot.
Sykes-Picot Treaty and all that, yes. Absolutely.
Frumpkin. The peace that rendered, okay, yeah.
So, you know, if we pull out of Iraq, it'll bring disorder to the region. We already have brought disorder to the region.
We surely have.
And so...
that would be one of the things I would bring up when you're
So I
saying
would-
everything's fine. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
You
I
said there's
mean,
no mistakes. That was a mistake. You think Vietnam was a mistake? They just had a big piece in the paper. He made the comparison. You and I
think
speak now.
Vietnam
He made
was
the comparison between
the
Vietnam
war against
and here,
Vietnam was a
and
colossal mistake.
about 4 million people were rendered jelly because of that. With remember napalm?
Yes.
It would burn down to the skin and everything? And that was something that
Because
was, you know.
we have something in this society, and it exists in others as well, that the solution of problems is by throwing armaments at, you know, that this will quell people. It doesn't. It only intensifies. It only inflames. It's like adding petroleum to a fire.
Yes, but they're now making bunker buster atomic weapons. Pakistan has atomic. They do that. We have black swan situations all over the world, the unexpected. You have interlinking alliances. And we have a system that now, instead of it being one tribe killing the other tribe and stealing their grain or something, as they've been doing throughout history, the leaders doing that and for their own group and everything, they now have a system, Eric, where if you push the button, it's the end of the whole hominoid species thing, and they're still juggling atomic bombs and talking about the same old principles that have held throughout all of history, which James Joyce called a nightmare. We haven't yet awoken. Do you think we've awakened, or do we need to? Or?
We have people in control at the moment who want the tough guy, throw bombs at them thing. We'll never get anywhere until we work with the inside of the human being, with the motivation, with the spirits and hearts. And when we do that, we could get very, very far. For example, the British are trying a technique of working with Muslim teachers in the Muslim schools in England on bringing the Quran to bear upon how to solve daily conflicts or how to, even moral conflicts. You find out that your neighbor who is Muslim is planning to blow up something, all right? How does the Quran help us to work this out?
And how
that is much more effective than going around throwing bombs at people.
Well, how is the Quran helping you to inform about the Western power that's coming over to drop napalm on my kids? It works the other way. It's not just the terrorists who are doing it. It's those who have the power who are the ones who are the real state terrorists who are exerting power, full spectrum dominance, 130 countries, including space, with atomic bomber. You know, there's reason for the people to be concerned with the lack of understanding of the people who are running this sort of show.
Very much so, very much so.
You see political revolution in the air? Or a qualitative challenge to the system?
I see attitudinal revolution as necessary.
You don't think that we're at a time where the assumed legitimacy of the Western model as they walk across the world with big league boots and so forth is going to be questioned at an ontologic level?
Oh, it's already being questioned.
Where? Effectively challenged.
The entire Middle East.
Well, you think so. So the Arab Islamic challenge to it.
We've lost in there.
We got Venezuela and a few things and everything.
We've lost there too.
But they assume, the international community, that they are legitimate. The same way Louis XVI thought he was legitimate.
Well, they're going
Versailles.
right. They're committing the same mistakes, but on the other side. Chavez is just. I think he's attempting to tinker with the Constitution so as to make himself re-electable for several times.
Yeah.
That's absolute monarchy.
But where is is there a need for a challenge to the basic model of the international consensus of things, or is that just tilting at windmills and there's no point because Mr. Fukuyama said we're at the end of history, we defeated the Soviet Union, capitalists have won, the system in place is it, get used to it, do what you're told, that kind of attitude the West is exerting toward the world, or is that too jaundiced a view of the way the world is set up? And how do you deal with people who think that way? There seem to be a growing number all over the world, since it doesn't seem to serve the interests of about 60–80% of the people at the bottom end of things. And there's a race to the bottom to exploit rather than to liberate.
Let me put it this way. To what extent, let me use a little coaching.
Yes, yes.
To what extent do you believe that the world is monolithic and on a single course in history? What aspects of human society, to what extent do you feel in human beings and in human societies there is potential for moving towards a model that is about universal peace and universal abundance, as opposed to constant antagonism and conversion to my point of view?
Seems to be very little. It's not being voiced by any of our political leadership. I think it's basically economics. We're all blinkered by this labor theory of value, that everything is so important in terms of that. We're being displaced by a technologically oriented productive system. We have no system of having a world where everybody's living according to something other than what an outer directed context of social organization dictates they have to do in order to eat. They're all slaves. We need Frederick Douglass. We live in a slave system in terms of this, and I see very little of anything that would lead to that, because if people would envision something where people are liberated, free of those kind of constraints, that it says you will be at certain place. You have to have a situation where somebody's so free that if the guy says you have to go there because I tell you to go there, and he says I don't want to go there, it doesn't feel right to me, I want to go over here, and they see that just simply as a denial of the work ethic, responsibility, and all the rest of what we teach everybody. We need to get freed from that, and I would suppose the major premise is the labor theory of value that informs all economic theory, which is outdated by a system that has to be reformed. And the left wing and the center, and all they will do is create more jobs for people to fit into.
Ideologies are in pieces. But let me ask you, who was more powerful in a long-term sense, Gandhi or Mao Zedong?
Well, Gandhi and Mao Zedong, I don't know. Who's going to win, China, or is China going to emerge?
Well,
I mean, China's the big power.
of the influence towards the kind of world that you would like to see.
Well, there are no models for that because we don't have it. We don't have anything. We're all blinkered by the thinking coming. We have not awakened to the fact that there's a new reality that has to be emerging. It's invisible. You can't see it. It's all invisible, and we got institutions that are outdated. Communism's outdated. The system in India with caste systems, they burn women. You know, or they have the dowries, and they have all kinds of things. It's ugly, and the trends for the less advantaged are, and everything goes to those who are already wealthy and strong. That's what it goes to. And you got to eat beyond outsourcing and a race to the bottom for wage slaves and system like that. They can do to get a little advantage. Beyond that, you've got economic displacement of labor in the productive process. We distribute all money to people to eat through their labor, and their labor is being undercut by other things, capital assets, and those all owned by a tiny class of people who do not have any vision. So for want of vision, and the vision's not appearing anywhere. Do you see anyone that's worth following in terms of our world leadership?
You.
No, baloney. I'm talking about the world.
You're searching.
Yeah.
There are people like you searching. You're aware that there is something amiss. When you say blinkered, okay, I think we are groping in the dark. The isms are dead. They're not.
What is dead?
The isms are dead. They're not working for anyone.
Well, yeah,
okay? And the model that we have, the capitalist model, there are different kinds of capitalism.
The socialist model, the communist model,
But even if you, I would like to find a capitalist